So how can we now ensure that the card is only showing up when the Your Card button is clicked and can be removed if we click on the backdrop or the close button? Well, we need to manage some state because we have different states now. One state where the card is visible and one state where it's not visible. These are two states, and whenever you have more than one state, you need to manage that state with React. And in function components, as we have it here, we use useState for that. So we import useState from React in the app.js file. Why in this file? Because that is where we do render the card. So that is where I want to manage the visibility of the card. Of course, we could also do it in some parent component and pass down the state data through props, but the only parent component to the app component is index, and that's not even a component, that's just where we initially render it, and therefore we actually have no parent component. And even if we would have, it makes a lot of sense to manage it here. So inside of the app function, I will use destructuring to pull out the two elements I get back from calling useState. My initial state is false because that is my card is shown state, and we also have a setCardIsShown function. And here we are just using useState as you learned it throughout this course, registering it with React so that React can manage this state for us for this component, and then getting access to the latest state snapshot whenever this component is re-evaluated, and getting access to this function, which allows us to update the state. And then here we can add a couple of functions to that functions. Functions which should be called when this button is clicked, for example, or when the backdrop is clicked. Because I'm talking about a showCardHandler function, which is a function defined here inside of the app function, in which I then call setCardIsShown and set this to true. And then I'll also add a hideCardHandler function like this, where I set cardIsShown to false. And now we just need to use that cardIsShown state and make sure that these two functions, which I just added, are getting called. Now let's start with using the cardIsShown state. In the end, we want to render the card component conditionally, and you learned how that works. You can simply wrap this in curly braces to evaluate a dynamic expression, and then access cardIsShown and use that shortcut with double ampersand operator to render card if this is truthy and not render it if this is falsy. And with that, the card disappears because initially it's false. Now showCardHandler should be called whenever this button is clicked. This button, however, is part of my header. So therefore, we should probably expect to get that function, that showCardHandler function called from inside the header. And for the header, to call this function, we need to pass a pointer at the function down through props. That's also a pattern you learned about throughout this course. Now it's up to you how you name that prop, but the convention for these props which hold functions is to start with on, since these are kind of like custom events which trigger this function if you look at it like this. And therefore here I'll name it onShowCard. Again, name is up to you. And I point at the showCardHandler. Important, don't execute it here, just point at it so that it can be executed from inside the header through that onShowCard prop. So inside that header component, we now want to execute that function, and we want to execute it whenever this header card button is being clicked. Now, this of course is another custom component, and therefore here, let's say we expect that we have an onClick prop. Again, this is up to you. I'm just using this name, which looks like the built-in onClick, because I in the end want to react to the button being clicked. But technically, you can use any name you want here, because you will have to write code inside of header card button to handle this prop anyways. But to this prop, I want to pass a pointer to that function I'm receiving on props on show card here. So in the header component, we receive the on show card prop, which points at show card handler. And now I'm forwarding that pointer at that function to the on click prop on the header card button. And now in the header card button, we therefore need to handle that on click prop, which we receive. Here on that built-in button, there is a built-in on click prop. So here the name is not up to you. And I now want to point at props on click, so that the function I receive on click in the header card button is forwarded to the on click prop on the button. This can be confusing, but in the end, we're just passing down a pointer at this show card handler button to that header card button. Now, you learned that if you have a prop chain like this, where you pass a prop through multiple levels of components, could be replaced with context. And indeed, we could use context here for handling this card visibility state. I will not do it here though, because I think here it is okay to have these two levels of components through which I'm passing props. But you could implement context here as well if you wanted to. We are going to use context in this demo application as well, but not for this card button. Here I will instead go for this prop drilling, so for this chain of props. With that, however, if you save everything, if you click your card, it should open up. Now, to make it closable, we want to make sure that both that close button as well as a click on the backdrop closes the card. So therefore, in app.js, where we use the card component, we should probably expect a onClose prop, or something like this. As always, the name is up to you, to which we pass the hide card handler. And now it's inside of that card component where we need to handle this onClose prop. For one, I want to go to that close button and there add a onClick prop and point at props.onClose. OnClose because that's the name I just chose in the app.js file. It's the onClose prop on which we receive the hide card handler, and therefore it's this function which I now want to forward to the button, so that upon a click on the button, that hide card handler function is being called. Now that's one way of closing the modal. It should also be closed if the backdrop is clicked. And to make that happen, we should go to the modal component, and on the backdrop there, we should add a onClick prop to the div. So using that built-in onClick prop, which exists on basically all HTML elements. And there, forward the value we expect to get on whatever prop you want. So here, let's say I expect to get an onClose prop. Now here, when we use the backdrop, we need to set that onClose prop because we just added it inside of the backdrop. And here I expect to get another onClose prop, but now on the modal component itself. So again, here I'll be passing a value through multiple levels down to the backdrop. You could use context, but I also want to highlight that if you are using context and you always bind a click on the backdrop to closing the card, then you would make this backdrop very specific and you would not be able to use the modal for other kinds of content because clicking the backdrop would always close the card. So if you had other content in modals as well, then you would be too specific. So here, using multiple levels of props could even be better because in this case, it makes the modal more reusable and doesn't tie it to one specific use case. That's just a side note why here I think using props instead of context is good, even though we are passing data, or to be precise, a function through multiple levels of components in this case. And therefore now, in the card component, on modal, we can add the on-close prop as well, and forward props on-close. And that's now the on-close prop for the card component, which is being set in the app component. And that is then this hide card handler function. With that, we can open the card, click on the backdrop to close it, or click on the close button to close it. So that's working. And with that, we implemented the card, at least with some dummy data here. It's not finished at all at the moment though. As a next step, I want to make sure that we can really add card items, and then we'll also refine the card overall, and so on.